Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into the strange and absurd world of ancient healing practices, the kind of remedies that make you wonder how humanity survived without accidentally wiping itself out. We're talking about the weirdest, wildest cures from history, because while we're lying here in the comfort of our warm beds with soft sheets, we owe a little gratitude to our ancestors. They didn't have aspirin or antibiotics, just leeches, goat dung, and a dash of hope for the best. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. There's always someone watching at 3 AM. Now dim those lights, settle in, and let's drift back in time to a world where healing meant more superstition than science. But somehow, it worked. Or, at least, they thought it did. Let's get started. Imagine being sick 3,000 years ago. No doctors, no hospitals. Just a bunch of people who thought magic spells and animal sacrifices were the best way to cure anything from the common cold to, well, death. Tonight, we're diving into the world of ancient remedies where hope was more important than actual medicine. First of all, let's set the stage. You're in ancient Egypt, Rome, or maybe even Mesopotamia. You've caught a nasty cold, or more likely a deadly fever, and there's no local pharmacy with shelves full of antibiotics. No, the doctor you go to see is probably someone who doubles as the village witch, a healer who might perform a ceremonial chant, wave some feathers, or invoke the gods before offering their best guess on what might work. This is the world of ancient medicine, equal parts mysticism, trial and error, and a whole lot of prayer. The first remedy that comes to mind is one we all think we know: leeches. Yes, leeches were considered a cure-all in many ancient societies. In ancient Greece, the practice of bloodletting was widely popular, with healers thinking that draining bad blood would balance your body's humours. If you were unlucky enough to catch a fever, the solution was to bleed out the illness. But not just with a needle or a knife. No, you had live leeches. The logic? These bloodsuckers would purge the bad blood from your body. While today we know it's not exactly the most effective treatment, the ancient people were, at least, getting their blood circulation going. So hey, maybe they were onto something. Now if leeches weren't doing the trick, the next remedy might involve a little more complicated methods. In ancient Rome, soldiers would sometimes be sent into battle with a whole new type of armour. A pouch of herbs and animal fats meant to ward off evil spirits and cure wounds. While modern medicine relies on bandages and antiseptics, back then it was all about what they thought could fend off the curse of illness. In some cases, this meant smearing your wounds with goat dung. Yes, you read that right, because they believed the earthy stuff had magical healing properties. Who needs antiseptic when you've got goat poop and a good prayer, right? But it doesn't stop there. The ancient Egyptians were serious about their healing rituals, often turning to magical incantations and potions to cure ailments. You might have been prescribed a potion made from the blood of an ibis, an ancient bird, or some crushed scorpion venom. You'd drink it, hope for the best, and pray that the gods didn't find your experiment too ridiculous. Some remedies weren't much better for a common cold either. The Egyptians had their own solution, which involved an odd concoction of honey, garlic and vinegar. Sounds like an ancient superfood smoothie, doesn't it? But no, it was believed that the mixture could fend off diseases and protect against infection. Jumping forward a little bit, the Greeks and Romans also had their fair share of peculiar remedies. One of their favourite treatments was a concoction called sarcophagy. Yes, it involves eating. You'd think this might be some kind of fancy modern-day health trend, but no, ancient Romans believed in eating the flesh of dead humans to treat injuries or sickness. This one is as uncomfortable as it sounds, but it was believed to transfer the strength of the deceased to the patient. It wasn't just a snack, it was apparently a form of healing, and let's not even get into the things they believed could heal a headache. If you were lucky enough to have a Roman doctor treat you, you might be given a medicine of crushed bones, vinegar and some leftover vegetable scraps from the market. No thanks, I'll stick with a nice headache pill, thank you. But perhaps one of the most bizarre treatments in history came from medieval times. Imagine being prescribed a bit of crushed mummified human flesh as part of your medicine. That's right. People in the Middle Ages were convinced that consuming bits of mummies could cure just about everything from headaches to even the plague. Whether or not it worked is debatable. but I can't imagine it did much for the overall wellness of the people involved. This practice was so common that by the 15th century, mummified bodies were being sold in pharmacies across Europe. It seems there were a lot of people in desperate need of both answers and a truly unfortunate taste in medicine. What all of these remedies have in common, however, is the desperation of those trying to cure what they couldn't understand. With no modern science to guide them, the ancients turned to anything that might work, and sometimes it did, at least for a while. Some herbs and plants actually did have medicinal properties, but for every effective cure there were 5 that were downright strange. The key takeaway: if you ever find yourself unwell in ancient times, a little leech therapy and a dash of goat dung might just do the trick, or at least keep you entertained while you wait for the inevitable. In ancient times, if you had a headache, fever, or any kind of illness, there was a good chance you'd find yourself covered in leeches. Not for fun, mind you, but because these little bloodsuckers were thought to balance your humours, and possibly drain the evil spirits out of you. If that sounds a little far-fetched, welcome to the world of ancient medicine, where the lines between magic, superstition and biology were a little more blurred. The concept of humours, which dates back to ancient Greek medicine, was the foundation of many of these treatments. Imagine your body as a delicate balance of 4 liquids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If these humours got out of whack, you weren't just sick, you were miserable in every sense of the word. A fever, for example, might mean you had too much blood and needed it drained out of your body. Enter the leech. These creatures weren't just creepy crawlers, they were thought to be little healers, capable of sucking out the bad blood and leaving you with a perfect balance. And let's be honest, nothing says perfect health quite like being covered in tiny blood-sucking creatures, right? To put it into perspective, bloodletting wasn't just a minor treatment. It was an entire medical practice that persisted for centuries. Leeches became a critical part of this ritual, as people believed that removing blood would alleviate a wide range of ailments, from headaches to indigestion. Imagine sitting there, feeling utterly miserable, and being told that the cure for your illness was to let these little guys feast on your blood. At least, unlike modern-day treatments, it wasn't a quick fix. The process could take hours, with patients sometimes finding themselves covered in dozens of these slimy little creatures, all while doctors recited incantations, or possibly just waited for the blood to drain. But here's the thing. Despite how strange this might sound, it was considered highly effective by the people who used it. The idea was that you had too much of something in your body, and leeches could suck out the excess, leaving you with a balance that would restore your health. For centuries, doctors used them for everything. You had a sore throat? Leeches. Stomach problems? Leeches. Overeating? Definitely leeches. And believe it or not, there was an entire industry built around breeding these creatures, as well as specific techniques for applying them. It wasn't just about the act of sucking blood. It was about strategic placement. Now, we may be laughing about this in hindsight, but we have to give ancient healers some credit. They were dealing with the medical knowledge they had at the time, and leeches were one of the few tools they had. Sure, they didn't understand germs, viruses, or bacteria the way we do now, but they sure knew how to use what they had. If you think about it, leeches were natural healing tools. They weren't made in a lab. They were creatures that thrived in nature, with their blood-sucking tendencies making them perfect for ancient remedies. In fact, many cultures from Europe to Asia used leeches in one form or another for centuries. Let's fast forward to the 19th century, when even doctors in Europe were swearing by leeches. It wasn't just something peasants did in the privacy of their homes, it was a widely accepted form of treatment. In fact, in the 1800s, an estimated 40 million leeches were used each year in France alone. At the time, leeches were sold in pharmacies like any other medical product. You could find them in neatly labelled glass jars, sitting alongside bandages and ointments. And these weren't your typical farm variety leeches either. No, they were carefully bred and tended to in controlled environments, as if they were the latest miracle cure. If you were unlucky enough to need treatment, you'd probably be handed a jar of these little guys and sent off to a doctor who knew exactly where to apply them. But of course, as we all know, science caught up with ancient remedies eventually. By the late 1800s, bloodletting was starting to fall out of favour. Doctors began to understand that blood loss wasn't actually beneficial for most diseases. In fact, it was probably making patients worse. Still, leeches didn't vanish entirely from the medical world. In fact, they've experienced a bit of a comeback in modern times. No, they're not used for balancing your humours anymore, but they're sometimes used in modern medicine for very specific purposes. For example, leeches are now used in reconstructive surgery to help with blood circulation and reduce swelling in patients. Who knew that the ancient remedy for a headache could now be used in the treatment of severe surgical wounds? So the next time you're feeling under the weather, before you go popping a pill, just remember, there's an ancient tradition of using leeches to make you feel better. Sure, it might not be your first choice, but if history teaches us anything, it's that sometimes the weirdest remedies are the ones that end up being strangely effective. Before the days of FDA approval, healers sold potions, lotions, and elixirs with promises that range from curing your arthritis to bringing back the dead. If you were sick, the answer was simple. Just drink something that looked suspiciously like swamp water and hope for the best. Ancient medicine wasn't about careful diagnoses or carefully crafted pharmaceuticals. It was a mix of belief, desperation, and a hefty dose of wishful thinking. And while today we might have skeptical health experts and a few regulations in place, back then there was little to stop someone from selling you a vial of healing magic that probably had more to do with good marketing than actual science. Let's set the stage in ancient Rome, where the market for medicinal potions was booming. Apothecaries weren't just selling herbs and spices for cooking, they were also in the business of selling remedies for just about every ailment under the sun. You had colicky babies? Here, have some miracle syrup made from the finest olive oil, crushed ants, and who knows what else. Got a headache? This potion, made from the juice of an odd-looking fruit, mixed with a little bit of whale blubber, was just the thing to restore your health. The weirder the ingredients, the more likely people were to believe it worked. After all, who would think a combination of snake venom and wine wouldn't do the trick? In ancient Rome, if you could make your potion sound exotic enough, you were halfway to becoming a wealthy and respected healer. And let's not forget the Egyptians. They took healing potions to a whole new level. Ancient Egyptian remedies often involved a mix of herbs, oils, and animal parts. Some of these concoctions weren't so much medicinal as they were, well, adventurous. For instance, an Egyptian doctor might hand you a vial of crocodile oil and tell you that applying it to your skin would not only cure your illness but also make you irresistibly attractive to the opposite sex. Who knows? Maybe it worked. Or at least, maybe it made people smell so strange that others stayed a few feet away. Either way, if you were sick in ancient Egypt, you were probably rubbing something that looked like it came straight out of a swamp on your skin. Moving westward, we arrive in medieval Europe, where healers weren't just selling potions. They were also selling charms and spells. These medieval potions were made from things like toad skins, bat wings, and who can forget, mercury. Yes, mercury. The ancient world's answer to everything from a broken heart to lead poisoning was a heavy dose of mercury. The truly absurd part, people believed it worked. Now we know mercury is a toxic substance, but back then, if your potion contained a few drops of mercury and a prayer to St. Pompous the Persistent, it was considered a valid cure. Some healers even sold love potions that, according to them, would make someone fall hopelessly in love with you. The problem, of course, is that these potions often had more side effects than romance, like severe stomach cramps or worse, death. If you thought that was bad, wait until you hear about the elixir that supposedly brought people back to life. Yes, for the truly desperate, especially in ancient China, there were potions marketed as immortality elixirs. These were often filled with ground-up minerals, jade powder, or even the essence of something mystical, like phoenix feathers. People believed that drinking these potions would grant them eternal life. While immortality wasn't exactly on the menu, the side effects of some of these potions included dizziness, hallucinations, and the general feeling of being, well, very dead. In fact, one of the most infamous immortality potions was actually made with a high concentration of mercury, which probably didn't do much for your lifespan. But hey, if you're going to risk it, you might as well go for eternal life, right? And of course, we can't leave out the snake oil peddlers of the American Old West. These guys were a direct descendant of ancient potion sellers, promising cures for everything from back pain to rashes to bad luck. The difference. The snake oil of the Old West was often just watered-down whiskey, with a few herbs thrown in for flavour. The thing that set it apart was the promise that it came from real snake oil. Because surely oil from a snake could work wonders for your arthritis, right? These snake oil salesmen would often show up in towns, complete with a flashy sales pitch and a few testimonies from satisfied customers, who were probably just hired actors. The only thing they didn't promise? That you wouldn't wake up with a hangover the next morning. Even today, ancient remedies are still part of our culture. While we have more advanced medicine now, there's still something oddly comforting about the idea of using a good old-fashioned herbal remedy. Or maybe it's just the appeal of those quirky old recipes, and while we may not be rubbing crocodile oil on our skin or swallowing snake venom, we still find ourselves tempted by the promise of a quick fix in a bottle. But remember, the next time someone offers you a magical elixir to cure your ills, just ask yourself, is it a miracle cure, or just some old snake oil with a fancy label? Let's talk surgery. In ancient times, surgery wasn't so much about precision and care as it was about cutting and praying. If you needed your appendix out, there was a chance you'd end up with more scars than you started with, and you probably wouldn't be alive to tell the tale. In fact, surgery in ancient times was a bit of a misnomer. Instead of sterile operating rooms and skilled surgeons, it was more about being brave enough to undergo a procedure that was equal parts terrifying and experimental. The surgical world of the past. Let's just say it was less, let's heal you, and more, let's hope for the best. If you were unfortunate enough to need surgery back in ancient Egypt, your options were limited to a handful of brave, or perhaps just desperate healers, who would either carve, cauterize, or stitch you up with rudimentary tools. Let's say you had an infection. Well, the first thing that would happen is the healer would probably try to drain it out. Simple enough, right? Unfortunately, the draining process wasn't so much about cleanliness, as it was about letting the body rid itself of bad humours. And if your infection happened to be deep inside you, say, your intestines, well, the procedure could get a lot worse. Surgeons would slice open your abdomen, but they didn't have antibiotics or anaesthetics. They had one option, praying that you'd survive it. And in many cases you didn't. Fast forward a few centuries, and we land in ancient Greece, where medicine was just beginning to find some structure. Thanks to Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, surgery was starting to get a little more organised, but it was still rudimentary. Surgeons at the time, who were actually just barber surgeons, yes, the same people who gave you your trim also gave you your amputation, would use basic tools like scalpels made from flint to cut away infections or tumours. There wasn't much precision involved. If you needed a tumour removed, the surgeon would simply take a blade to it. If they didn't slice too deeply, you'd be lucky. But of course there was always a chance they would. Then of course you had the problem of pain. Ancient Greek doctors had no concept of anaesthesia, so the standard procedure for a painful surgery was to give the patient a hearty drink of wine. If you were lucky, the wine might knock you out enough to get through the procedure. If you were unlucky, you'd just be really drunk during a surgery that made no promises of survival. Imagine being awake while someone cuts into your body with flint tools, all while you sip wine that tastes suspiciously like it was made from fermented feet. Pain? Well, you just had to endure it, because pain relief wasn't really a thing back then. Let's say you needed something even more drastic, a limb amputated, for example. This was a procedure that was occasionally necessary after injuries, but it wasn't exactly performed with the greatest skill. Surgeons in ancient Rome and Greece would often tie off the limb with a rope or wooden tourniquet to stop the bleeding. Unfortunately, this sometimes didn't work as well as hoped, and you could end up bleeding to death long before the amputation was complete. And even if you survived the procedure, the risk of infection was always looming. Without any way to sterilise instruments, what were once minor wounds could easily become fatal. Surgical success rates were so dismal that there were very few documented cases of patients recovering from complex procedures. Ancient texts sometimes mention cases where a patient survived a surgery, but often these successes meant the person lived just long enough to recover from the immediate trauma, only to die from complications later, like infection or sepsis. One of the more infamous ancient surgeries was the trepanation procedure. This involved drilling or cutting into the skull to treat head injuries or ailments like epilepsy or severe headaches. In some ancient cultures, it was believed that releasing the evil spirits from the brain could cure mental illness, so physicians would literally carve into a patient's skull with crude tools. Trepanation was one of the riskiest procedures of the ancient world. While some survived the surgery, many didn't, and there was no telling how long a person could live after their skull was cut open. But hey, if you survived the surgery, you were probably deemed a hero, or at least a miracle. Even when it came to setting broken bones, ancient methods were a gamble. Roman doctors sometimes used splints or cast-like devices made of wood or linen to stabilise fractures, but these were hardly as effective as modern casts, and the risk of the bones healing incorrectly was high. The idea of a bone being set properly didn't exist in the ancient world. If your bone healed in a crooked fashion, well, it was a lifetime of limping and hoping no one noticed. And let's not even get started on surgery during the medieval period. By this time, medical knowledge had taken a turn for the worse. Medieval surgeons were known to use all kinds of questionable methods, like applying magical salves, or even performing surgery under candlelight, hoping the lack of a decent light source wouldn't hinder their work. The idea of antiseptics was unheard of, and sterile conditions, forget about it. Most medieval surgeries were performed in filthy conditions, often on patients who had no choice but to undergo the procedure. The reality of ancient surgery was far from glamorous. It was a world of blood, confusion, and hope. Hope that the patient would survive the procedure, and hope that the healer's skills were enough to pull them through. But if you found yourself on the operating table in ancient times, the odds were stacked against you, and if you survived, well, you were one of the lucky few who had an incredible story to tell. Just be sure to leave out the part where you almost died on the table. That bit tends to ruin the mood. In some cultures, urine was more than just waste. It was seen as a miracle substance with the power to cure a variety of ailments. It was a common remedy for everything from infections to bad skin. But the real question is, who was the first person to think, you know, I should try drinking that? Imagine being in a time before modern medicine, when every bodily function, no matter how gross, was thought to have magical properties. And in this world of strange remedies, urine was considered a must-have ingredient for everything from treating wounds to keeping your skin youthful. Who could resist that? Apparently, not a lot of ancient people. Let's begin with the ancient Romans, who were some of the biggest proponents of urine in their daily life. In fact, urine wasn't just a medical cure, it was a luxury item in ancient Rome. If you were wealthy, you might find yourself rubbing urine-soaked cloths on your skin as a form of rejuvenating treatment. Sounds pleasant, right? The practice was based on the belief that urine had cleansing properties. Roman citizens would even use it to bleach their clothing. Yes, they believed the ammonia in urine was an effective natural cleaner. And while we now know that ammonia is a great cleaning agent, the idea of using urine as a facial cleanser, well, that was just part of the charm of Roman beauty rituals. But it wasn't just for skincare. Urine was also considered an excellent cure for a range of physical ailments. If you had an infection, sore throat, or even a headache, urine was often prescribed as a remedy. How did it work, you ask? The answer is, it probably didn't. But that didn't stop ancient civilizations from using it. The Greeks, for instance, recommended urine as a treatment for kidney stones. The thinking was that by consuming your own urine, you could flush out the toxins causing your health issues. Drinking your own urine wasn't just for the Romans, it was popular in many ancient cultures, and it was often used to cleanse the body from the inside out. Talk about a detox. In addition to drinking it, people in ancient times also bathed in urine. That's right, urine baths were a real thing. The ancient Greeks, for example, thought that urine had powerful cleansing properties, so they would use it to treat everything from wounds to skin conditions like acne. They believed that urine was a natural healer, capable of clearing up rashes, bruises, and even wounds from battle. If you were in a Roman army and returned home covered in cuts and bruises, you might find a healer telling you that a nice soak in a warm bath of your own urine would do wonders for your recovery. Who needs antibiotics when you've got urine, right? The Egyptians, always ahead of their time in terms of medicinal practices, also believed in the power of urine. One famous Egyptian remedy for treating bad skin involved rubbing urine on the affected areas. It was believed to help clear up acne, reduce skin inflammation, and even make you glow with that radiant look we all crave. So if you were an ancient Egyptian beauty, it wasn't just about oils and perfumes, it was about having a good, healthy dose of urine as part of your skincare routine. But again, who knows if it actually worked? What we do know is that it certainly made people feel better about the state of their skin, which is half the battle when it comes to beauty. But hold on, it gets even weirder. In the Middle Ages, urine was still considered a powerful medicine. In fact, people would often drink urine concoctions, or even apply them to their skin as a form of anti-aging treatment. It's easy to imagine the medieval court ladies swapping stories of how much younger their skin looked after using their secret potion. only to reveal it was just urine. No one in the medieval period wanted to admit they were bathing in or drinking urine, but the practice was alive and well. If you were living through the Black Plague and you had no idea how to fight off the infection, urine was your go-to remedy. Not exactly the miracle cure we'd hoped for, but it was what people had to work with. Urine's role in history isn't just limited to skincare and health treatments. It even had its place in the world of magic and superstition. In some cultures, urine was believed to have mystical properties. It was used in rituals believed to ward off evil spirits or bad luck. In some instances, urine was even considered a protective potion, meant to guard you against curses or dark magic. So the next time you get a bad feeling about someone, just remember, in ancient times, you might have been advised to splash a little urine around to keep those evil spirits at bay. The real beauty of these ancient beliefs is that they show how inventive, and dare we say resourceful, people were when it came to using the materials at hand. While we might not reach for a cup of urine when we're feeling under the weather, back then it was all about what worked at the time. Sure, urine might not have the magical healing powers people thought it did, but it's a testament to how human beings, in the absence of modern medicine, looked for any way they could to heal themselves, even if it involved a little bit of, shall we say, liquid courage. So next time you're feeling a bit under the weather, you might want to pass on the urine-based treatments. But hey, don't knock the ancient world. When they didn't have much else, at least they had hope. And sometimes, that's all you need to get through a tough time, whether it's a glass of water or something a little less conventional. In ancient Egypt, mummies weren't just for tombs. Oh no. In some cases, bits of mummified bodies were considered a cure-all. People ground them into powder and used them as medicine. Yes, that's right. Mummified humans as medicine. Talk about taking get well soon to a whole new level. Now, before you get too squeamish, remember, this was a time when people believed in the mystical powers of the afterlife and thought that the essence of a mummy could be transferred to the living. Healing potions were as likely to include the crushed remains of an ancient priest as they were to contain herbs, honey and oils. The line between sacred and practical was a little blurry back then. So, let's take a trip back to the streets of ancient Egypt, where if you were sick you didn't just visit your local apothecary for some thyme and garlic. No, you might be handed a small vial filled with powdered mummy. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, doesn't it? But the reality was that the ancient Egyptians and later civilizations believed that the preserved bodies of the dead contained magical properties. These properties, they thought, could be transferred into the living, and what better way to bring a bit of immortality into your life than to ingest it? Mummified remains were considered so powerful that they were not only used for medicinal purposes, but were also believed to have the ability to ward off evil spirits. The Egyptians thought that by consuming parts of a mummy, you were tapping into the ancient powers of the deceased. In fact, some people were so obsessed with the magical benefits of mummies that they believed it could cure anything from headaches to epilepsy. Imagine that. Popping a little piece of a dead king into your morning tea to ward off a cold. Now, I'm not saying it worked, but let's just say it was a whole lot more popular than getting a flu shot. But it wasn't just in Egypt where mummified flesh had its time in the spotlight. As European trade routes opened up, mummies found their way to Western markets. In the 16th and 17th centuries, mummies became a valuable commodity in Europe. People believed they were the perfect remedy for a variety of ailments. Doctors would grind up mummified remains and prescribe it to patients, convincing them that this cure could treat everything from physical ailments to, more controversially, melancholy, which we now know as depression. In fact, mummified body parts became so popular that there was even a booming trade in fake mummies, because if you couldn't afford a real one, you could always buy a mummy made from less than sacred materials. And who needed authenticity when you had faith in ancient magic? One of the strangest and most gruesome applications of mummified remains came in the form of mummy medicine during the medieval and Renaissance periods. Physicians would use ground mummy to create ointments or tinctures, claiming that it could heal broken bones, ease stomach issues, or even prevent aging. The idea was that the mummy itself, having been preserved through a combination of ritual and embalming, had acquired some sort of divine power. They believed that by applying the powdered remains to the skin or ingesting it, you could absorb that energy and heal whatever ailed you. In fact, the powder was often mixed with wine or other liquids to make it more palatable, as no one wanted to take their medicine in the form of a solid chunk of ancient remains. It was medicinal and apparently magical mummification at its finest. The But as you might have guessed, consuming mummified flesh came with its risks. It wasn't just a case of spiritual energy being transferred from ancient bones to your modern-day self. In fact, many of the people who used mummy powder for medicinal purposes likely ended up making themselves sicker. The mummies they consumed weren't just ancient corpses. They were often riddled with bacteria and parasites. This meant that, instead of healing, people might have been infecting themselves with whatever diseases the mummies had once carried. So, while they were trying to tap into the wisdom and health of ancient Egypt, they might have been getting something much more dangerous instead. Even the Egyptians themselves weren't immune to the more bizarre uses of mummified remains. Although their belief in the afterlife led them to carefully preserve the bodies of the dead, they also used mummy powder in their religious rituals. Some ancient Egyptian priests and healers would bury parts of mummies in sacred places, believing it would bless the land and make the harvest more bountiful. As strange as it sounds, they believed that the physical remains of their ancestors carried an immense spiritual power that could influence the world around them. In a world without science, this made perfect sense. Why not use the energy of the dead to influence the living? By the 19th century, the practice of using mummified bodies as medicine finally came to an end. The world was starting to embrace modern science, and doctors were beginning to realise that perhaps drinking powdered mummies wasn't the best way to treat a cough. While the fascination with mummies didn't fully die out, hello, Egyptology, people moved on to more scientifically grounded methods of healing. But still, there's something oddly fascinating about the belief in the healing power of the dead. It speaks to the human desire for control, for tapping into something beyond ourselves in the hopes of solving our most pressing problems. And while we might not use mummies as medicine anymore, we can still look back and appreciate the creativity and the courage of those who thought that bits of ancient bodies might just hold the key to eternal health. You've probably heard your grandmother say, "A bowl of hot chicken soup will make you feel better." Turns out this old-school wisdom has roots in ancient times. Egyptians, Romans, and even the Chinese used chicken-based broths to cure everything from a cold to a broken heart. So next time you're feeling under the weather and your mom hands you a steaming bowl of soup, just know, she's not just feeding you comfort food, she's continuing a centuries-old tradition. Chicken soup was considered so powerful in ancient times that it wasn't just a meal, it was practically a magical elixir. But what was so special about chicken broth that made it a go-to remedy for the sick, the weary, and even the love-stricken? Let's start with the Egyptians, the pioneers of medicinal soups. In ancient Egypt, chicken was a symbol of nourishment and healing. The Egyptians believed that chicken had the ability to balance the body's energies and restore vitality. They often used chicken-based broths to treat everything from the common cold to digestive problems. The broth was not just a quick fix, it was part of a holistic approach to health, designed to soothe the body from the inside out. In fact, chicken soup was so important in Egyptian medicine that it was considered a luxury for the sick. If you had the privilege of sipping on a warm, hearty chicken broth, you were receiving the best of what the ancient world had to offer. As we move westward, we find that the Romans were equally fond of chicken soup. The Romans didn't just eat it for comfort, they believed it had healing powers. Chicken broth, particularly when made with herbs and spices, was thought to help with digestion, boost energy, and even clear up respiratory issues. It was a common remedy for the elderly and the sick, who might have found the rich broth easier to digest than solid food. But chicken soup wasn't just a home remedy. It was also served in public baths, where Romans would soak in the steamy waters and sip on broth to cleanse both body and soul. If you think about it, it was kind of like their version of a spa day, except instead of cucumber slices on your eyes, you had a bowl of broth to sip while lounging. Meanwhile, in ancient China, chicken soup wasn't just a comfort food, it was part of a broader belief in the power of food as medicine. Traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, has long emphasized the healing properties of certain foods, and chicken soup with its warming qualities was no exception. Chicken was considered a yang food, energizing and warming, helping to counteract the coldness of the body. If you were feeling sick, the remedy was simple: chicken soup. It was thought to restore balance to your internal energies, promote circulation, and clear up any blockages. In fact, TCM even had specific ways of preparing chicken broth, often adding herbs like ginger, garlic, and ginseng to enhance its healing properties. If you had a cold or flu, chicken soup wasn't just something to eat. It was your body's personal defense against the elements. But what about the psychological power of chicken soup? It turns out, chicken soup might have a bigger impact on your mood than just warming your body. In cultures all around the world, chicken soup is seen as comfort food, something that makes you feel nurtured, cared for, and loved. The act of serving someone a bowl of hot soup has a deep psychological significance, as it signals empathy, love, and protection. Whether it's your mom or grandmother handing you the soup, there's something incredibly soothing about the ritual of someone preparing food for you when you're feeling down. It's like a hug in a bowl, a little act of care that can turn your day around. Even in the modern era, the healing properties of chicken soup are still recognised. Science has caught up with what ancient cultures knew intuitively. Chicken soup can indeed help alleviate cold symptoms. Studies have shown that the steam from hot chicken broth can help clear nasal congestion, while the warm liquid helps keep you hydrated, important when you're fighting off an illness. Plus, the amino acids released from the chicken during cooking have anti-inflammatory properties, which can help ease symptoms like sore throats and muscle aches. So, the next time you're sick and someone hands you that steamy bowl, you can rest assured that it's not just comfort food. There's a little science behind it too. But even beyond its physical benefits, chicken soup carries a deep emotional and cultural weight. It's a food that transcends generations, bringing people together in times of need. From ancient Egypt to the modern-day kitchen, chicken soup has been a symbol of care and nourishment. Whether it's a remedy for a cold, a broken heart, or just a tough day, a bowl of chicken soup represents the time-honoured tradition of finding comfort in food. And maybe, just maybe, a little healing too. So, the next time you're feeling under the weather and someone suggests chicken soup, don't just take it as a simple suggestion. It's a timeless tradition, a historical cure-all, and in many ways a little bit of magic in a bowl. It might just be the oldest trick in the book, one that has stood the test of time because, well, sometimes the simplest things really do work the best. If you went to see an ancient doctor with any sort of ailment, there was a pretty good chance they'd tell you the best way to cure it was to drain some of your blood. But did it work? Probably not. Still, it was a treatment used for centuries, even when people were bleeding out from it. Bloodletting was all the rage for a long time, despite the fact that it wasn't exactly, well, effective. And yet, doctors and healers throughout history continue to wield their sharp instruments, ready to draw blood from patients in the name of health. So what was the deal with this practice? Did anyone ever stop and think, maybe draining my patient's blood isn't the best way to treat a cold? Let's start with the ancient Greeks, who were among the first to popularise bloodletting. The belief was rooted in the idea of the four humours, a medical theory that suggested the body was made up of four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If these humours became unbalanced, it could cause illness. So to restore balance, the answer was simple: take some blood out. The thinking was that the excess blood could be causing all sorts of issues like fevers or headaches. And who wouldn't want a good, balanced amount of blood? Too much of anything is never good, right? Of course, this meant that for every small illness, whether a fever, a sore throat, or even depression, your doctor might recommend a nice little bloodletting session to rebalance your humours. Imagine, you're feeling run down, maybe a little congested, and the doctor's solution is to stick a needle in you and drain out some of your precious red liquid. Sounds terrifying, right? And for good reason. Without any kind of sterile technique or anaesthesia, bloodletting was not only ineffective but could easily lead to infections, blood loss, and, let's be honest, a whole lot of suffering. But the practice persisted for centuries because the medical theories of the time were so entrenched. Doctors truly believed that this was the best way to cure a variety of ailments. It didn't matter that the patient felt worse afterward, or that their symptoms didn't improve. It was a ritual of hope, even if it wasn't grounded in science. Now, let's zoom forward to the Middle Ages. By this time, bloodletting had become an almost automatic response to just about any ailment. The most famous medical practitioners, from royal physicians to local healers, would be well equipped with leeches, lancets, and sharp tools to open veins and drain blood. If you had a headache, bloodletting. Back pain, bloodletting. An upset stomach, you guessed it, bloodletting. And sometimes, this wasn't just a quick procedure. People were subjected to multiple rounds of bloodletting, thinking it would purify their bodies and keep illness at bay. In fact, this practice was considered so important that it was included in the treatments of nearly every royal court, especially in Europe, where rulers and nobles relied heavily on bloodletting to maintain health. Even the infamous King Charles II of England had his fair share of bloodletting sessions to fix all kinds of ailments, from colds to depression. But as we all know, even kings aren't immune to bad medical advice. One of the most tragic and almost comical examples of bloodletting gone wrong involves the death of George Washington, the first president of the United States. In 1799, when Washington fell ill with a throat infection, his doctors decided the best course of action was to let him bleed. Over the course of just a few hours, they drained nearly half of his blood. Guess what? Washington died. While it's impossible to say for sure whether the bloodletting directly caused his death, it certainly didn't help his condition. In fact, historians have speculated that the excessive blood loss contributed to his swift decline, a grim testament to the fact that bloodletting was rarely the miracle cure people hoped for. Despite the failure of bloodletting, the practice stubbornly clung to life for centuries. Even in the 19th century, doctors were still using it, especially for people suffering from conditions like tuberculosis, pneumonia, or even the common cold. It wasn't until the advent of modern medical practices, like germ theory, antibiotics, and scientific research, that bloodletting was finally put to rest. But it wasn't just tossed aside overnight. For a long time, people still swore by it. The idea that removing excess blood could make you feel better became so ingrained that it took decades of medical advancements to prove just how harmful the practice could be. Interestingly, though, bloodletting hasn't completely disappeared from the medical world. While it's no longer a go-to treatment for colds and headaches, there are rare, modern instances where bloodletting in a more refined form is used for certain conditions. For example, in cases of hemochromatosis, a condition where the body absorbs too much iron, doctors may prescribe therapeutic phlebotomy, essentially controlled bloodletting, to reduce iron levels. So in a very limited sense, bloodletting has made its way back into medical practice, but now with a clear scientific rationale and under carefully controlled conditions. So, did bloodletting ever actually work? The short answer, probably not. The long answer, it certainly made people feel like they were doing something about their illness, and sometimes that was enough to keep the practice going for thousands of years. Unfortunately, the reality was that it often did more harm than good. It's hard to imagine people willingly allowing blood to be drained from their bodies now that we know better, but that was just a part of the medical landscape for far too long. Today, when we think of treatments from the past, bloodletting serves as a perfect reminder of how far medicine has come, and how much of history was about hoping for the best, even when the science wasn't quite there yet. If you lived in ancient Rome or Egypt, one of your go-to remedies might have been goat dung. Yes, you read that right. Goat dung. It was applied to wounds, or sometimes even ingested, as a cure for everything from infections to bad dreams. If that doesn't make you appreciate modern medicine, I don't know what will. We've come a long way from the days when people thought a little animal waste was the key to health and vitality. But before we start pointing fingers, let's take a moment to explore how this truly bizarre practice became an integral part of ancient healing. Let's begin with ancient Egypt, where everything from herbs to animal parts was used in medicine. The Egyptians didn't just use goat dung for fun. No, it was carefully applied to wounds, burns and cuts, because it was believed to possess antiseptic properties. Why goat dung, though? Well, like most ancient remedies, there wasn't a lot of scientific reasoning behind it, just a series of trial and error and some wild leaps in logic. The Egyptians had no idea about bacteria or infection. They just thought that the warmth and consistency of the dung might somehow help heal wounds. And while it's a stretch, the combination of the natural enzymes and bacteria in the dung could have had some real impact in certain cases, albeit unintentionally. But it wasn't just about topical application. Some ancient texts suggest that goat dung was also used internally. That's right. People might have ingested it in the belief that it could cure everything from indigestion to mental health issues like anxiety or insomnia. Imagine being told that to feel better, all you had to do was swallow a little goat manure. It sounds utterly ridiculous, but if you think about it, people in ancient times didn't have a whole lot of options. Without any understanding of germs or the human digestive system, They had to rely on a bit of folklore, trial and hope. It's no wonder that goat dung made its way into the medicine cabinet as a multi-purpose cure. Now, let's jump over to ancient Rome, where they shared a lot of the same beliefs as the Egyptians. Roman healers, in particular, were fond of using goat dung as a treatment for skin ailments. Acne, rashes and even boils were common complaints, and it was believed that the dung would help cleanse the skin, drawing out impurities and speeding up the healing process. Like the Egyptians, the Romans had no idea what bacteria or infections were, but they knew that some things worked, even if they didn't fully understand why. They figured that if goat dung could help animals, surely it could help humans too. So they'd rub it on their skin, creating a paste or even using it in baths. It wasn't glamorous, but to the Romans it was a tried and true remedy. But perhaps the most fascinating and disturbing use of goat dung comes from the ancient belief that it could ward off bad dreams. Yes, you read that right. Goat dung was thought to have protective qualities, and some cultures believed that if you placed a little on your bedside table or near your head while you slept, it would keep evil spirits at bay and prevent nightmares. In essence, they used it as a spiritual shield, a tiny smelly barrier between themselves and whatever horrors lurked in their dreams. It sounds absurd, but given the lack of scientific understanding at the time, the logic was simple. If something worked in the real world, why couldn't it work in the supernatural one? While the practice of using goat dung as medicine was widespread, it didn't exactly have a perfect success rate. For all the faith people placed in it, it was still an animal waste product, and let's face it, sometimes it just didn't do the job. Ingesting it could have led to stomach infections, while topical applications were often more harmful than healing. But the fact that people turned to it time and time again shows the lengths they were willing to go to find something, anything, to make them feel better. In many ways, it's a testament to human ingenuity and the will to survive, even if the solutions weren't exactly pleasant. And here's the kicker. Goat dung didn't just appear in Roman and Egyptian medicine. In other parts of the world, people used it for a variety of health purposes. The ancient Greeks, for example, believed that goat dung could help with digestion, while in other parts of Europe it was used as a poultice for sprains and fractures. As disgusting as it sounds, it was a widely accepted and used remedy, passed down through generations. Today, of course, we look at this practice with a mix of amusement and horror. We now know that goat dung is, well, not the cure-all ancient people thought it was, but we can't help but admire their resourcefulness, and maybe, just a little, their ability to see the world in ways we'd never dream of. In a time before antibiotics, vaccines, or any real medical understanding, people had to rely on whatever worked, no matter how strange it seemed. And while goat dung might not be making its way into pharmacies anytime soon, we can at least give a nod to the creative, albeit odd, healing practices of the past. So, the next time you hear someone complain about modern medicine, just remember, there was a time when goat dung was considered a legitimate health remedy. If that doesn't make you grateful for your doctor's office, I don't know what will. Hair loss is a problem as old as time itself. And in ancient times, people didn't just accept baldness. They fought it with all sorts of bizarre treatments, from snake venom to crushed beetles. Let's take a look at some of the oddest ways people tried to keep their hair, or what was left of it. The desperation to hold on to a full head of hair was real, and if you were unlucky enough to start losing your locks, ancient remedies were more about hope, and sometimes a bit of superstition, than actual science. But hey, in the absence of modern hair regrowth treatments, people were really giving it their all. In ancient Egypt, where beauty was a huge cultural value, losing your hair was no small matter. Not only did it affect one's appearance, but it also had social implications. To battle baldness, the Egyptians turned to all sorts of creative concoctions. One remedy involved using a mixture of animal fats, including those from cats, which were believed to have magical properties. You could rub this fat into your scalp, hoping for regrowth, but if that wasn't enough, the Egyptians also turned to a concoction made from the ashes of the burnt bones of pigs, mixed with a bit of honey. It might sound like the recipe for a medieval dessert, but no. This was meant to restore hair. Spoiler alert, no one left with a full head of hair, but they sure did smell like a mix of animals and burnt offerings. Talk about giving your hair a serious treatment. Moving west to ancient Greece, things didn't get much better. Greek physicians like Hippocrates, often regarded as the father of modern medicine, recommended all sorts of strange potions to stimulate hair growth. One such concoction included a mixture of crushed beetles which would be applied to the scalp in an effort to bring back lost hair. Apparently the idea behind using crushed beetles was that their secret essence would stimulate hair follicles. Of course, when you think about it, it's not much of a leap to imagine that putting ground-up insects on your head might do something, though not likely what you're hoping for. The fact that Hippocrates himself suggested this treatment makes you wonder if some ancient treatments were based on pure trial and error with a dash of desperation thrown in. The Romans, being a little more advanced in terms of medicine, had their own strategies for hair loss. Roman Emperor Tiberius, who reportedly struggled with thinning hair, even sought out remedies from his physicians, and the best they could come up with was applying a paste made from a combination of radishes, leeks and cabbage. This hair tonic was believed to increase blood flow to the scalp and in theory promote hair growth. And while cabbage might do wonders for your digestive health, it's unlikely it did much for your follicles. Still, the Romans were persistent, and they passed these recipes along for generations, thinking they were on the cutting edge of hair care. Then there was the bizarre remedy popular in ancient India, where a particularly unusual oil treatment gained traction. It involved using a combination of sesame oil and bovine urine, yes, cow urine, to massage the scalp. The belief was that this mixture would nourish the scalp and encourage hair growth. Some believed that cow urine, being sacred, had divine healing powers. Whether or not it had any effect on the hair was debatable, but it surely would have left your hair smelling, well, distinctly earthy. In the end, while this particular remedy didn't have much to show for it, it's a testament to the power of faith in ancient treatments. Sometimes it was less about what worked, and more about what you were willing to believe. Then there were the ancient Chinese, who turned to the powers of herbs and roots. One of the most famous hair loss remedies in Chinese history involved using a mixture of ginseng and green tea. While both are potent substances with some health benefits, they were combined in a hair tonic meant to strengthen the roots and promote healthy hair. While some of these herbs might have had beneficial effects on circulation and general health, the idea that they would reverse hair loss was a bit of a stretch. Despite this, the Chinese continued to practice herbal medicine for centuries, and to this day, traditional Chinese medicine still uses a variety of herbs and concoctions for improving hair health. If you thought that was all the ancient world had to offer in terms of hair loss remedies, think again. In some cultures, people even tried rituals to encourage hair regrowth. For example, some believed that sleeping with a certain type of amulet or charm under the pillow could bring back lost hair. Others practiced offerings to the gods of beauty, hoping that their devotion would be rewarded with a full head of hair. It wasn't so much about scalp treatments at this point. It was more about aligning with the mystical forces of the universe. Of course, if the hair didn't grow back, it was probably just the gods' way of saying, try again next time. While these treatments certainly didn't work the way people hoped, they're a reminder of the lengths people have gone to in order to preserve their looks, health, and dignity. If we're being honest, ancient hair loss remedies were at best odd, and at worst ineffective. But the willingness to try anything shows just how important it was to maintain one's appearance, and how, throughout history, we've always searched for ways to restore what was lost, even if it meant rubbing beetle juice into our scalps or massaging cow urine in our hair. So, the next time you're dealing with a bad hair day, just remember, things could have been worse. You could have been rubbing goat fat and burnt pig bones into your scalp in hopes of stopping your hairline from retreating. Thank goodness for modern science and the hair products we have today. In ancient times, teeth were considered a bit of an afterthought. If you had a toothache, your best bet was to endure the pain until it got so bad that the only solution was to pull the tooth out with pliers. Without anaesthesia, of course. Dental care was a luxury few could afford. Forget about fancy toothpaste, floss, or even a toothbrush. If you were unlucky enough to suffer from a toothache or a cavity, you were in for an experience that would make modern dentistry look like a spa treatment. So let's dive into the brutal world of ancient dental care, where pain was part of the treatment and good dental hygiene was practically a myth. The ancient Egyptians, for example, were among the first to dabble in dental treatments, but they didn't have the shiny high-tech tools we take for granted today. In fact, they mostly relied on crude methods, often involving the use of honey, which is surprisingly a natural antibacterial, to treat gum infections. If a tooth got too bad, well, it might be extracted, but no fancy dental chair and calming music. Just a quick yank with a pair of metal pliers. Some ancient Egyptian writings even describe the practice of filling cavities with a paste made from resin. But if you think that's a win, think again. A resin-filled tooth didn't exactly have the longevity of today's dental fillings, and most people with bad teeth had to just grin and bear it until the tooth fell out on its own, or until it was pulled. Now let's talk about the ancient Greeks. While they were more advanced in some aspects of medicine, dental care still wasn't exactly their forte. Greek physicians like Hippocrates did write about dental care in their medical texts, but their solutions were just as unpleasant as you might expect. For toothaches, they recommended a mixture of vinegar and honey to numb the pain. Spoiler alert, it didn't really work. If the pain got unbearable, you might have found yourself at the mercy of a dentist who would extract the offending tooth with a set of pliers. It wasn't about comfort or ease, it was about survival. The idea of preventing tooth decay or using proper oral hygiene was completely foreign to them. The Greeks didn't even have toothbrushes. In fact, they would have used twigs or small sticks to try to clean their teeth, and even then, that wasn't very effective. Let's not forget the Romans, who were masters of many things, including creating complex plumbing systems. But when it came to dentistry, they were still stuck in the Dark Ages. Romans were notorious for their teeth being in bad shape, and as you can imagine, dental hygiene was not a priority in a society that was more concerned with chariot races and gladiator battles. However, the Romans did have a bit of an edge when it came to tooth care, thanks to the advent of a certain toothpaste-like paste made from crushed bones and oyster shells. While it might have helped scrub away some plaque, it didn't exactly prevent cavities or tooth decay. Still, the Romans did try, and they even had a few remedies for bad breath, like chewing on aromatic herbs or using a concoction of vinegar and salt to rinse their mouths. But for the most part, if you had a bad tooth, you were in for some pretty painful times. Then there was the Middle Ages, where dentistry took another nosedive. By this time, the practice of dentistry was mostly left to barbers, who would moonlight as tooth pullers. Yes, barbers were the dentists of the day, and if you went to one with a toothache, you could expect little more than a quick yank with a set of metal pliers, and maybe some local whiskey to numb the pain, if you were lucky. There was no such thing as sterile equipment, no anaesthesia, and certainly no understanding of how to properly care for your teeth. The idea of brushing your teeth didn't even exist, and because of the lack of dental hygiene, tooth decay and gum disease were rampant. By the time you hit the Renaissance period, some progress was made, though it was still rudimentary at best. For instance, Renaissance dentists sometimes used a technique called tooth whitening, involving a mixture of pumice stone and vinegar, which, while effective at removing stains, didn't do much to prevent decay. But even with the advancements in medicine, the reality for most people remained the same. Toothaches were to be endured, and teeth were a sign of survival, not beauty. If you lost a tooth, you either lived without it or had it pulled. Dental prosthetics didn't become widely available until much later, and the concept of keeping your teeth healthy for life wasn't on anyone's radar. In ancient times, the most common cause of tooth loss wasn't just cavities or decay, it was sheer neglect. Without proper dental tools, people often resorted to using whatever they could find to clean their teeth: sticks, frayed twigs, or even rudimentary cloths. But that didn't keep their teeth in great shape. In fact, archaeological evidence shows that ancient populations often had severe dental problems. They didn't understand the causes of tooth decay, and without access to the modern tools we take for granted, they suffered from painful, infected teeth for much of their lives. Fast forward to today, and we can't imagine a world without fluoride toothpaste, dental floss and professional cleanings every 6 months. But the next time you go to the dentist and feel nervous about getting a filling, just remember, ancient people had it way worse. You might need a little work done, but at least you'll be sitting in a comfy chair with a local anaesthetic, not strapped to a rickety table while someone pulls your teeth out with pliers. So go ahead, flash a smile. Modern dentistry has got you covered. In some cultures, pineapple wasn't just a tasty snack. It was also believed to have magical healing powers. From curing indigestion to making your skin glow, this tropical fruit was thought to do it all. Unfortunately, it didn't cure anything, but it sure made the ancient diet a little sweeter. Imagine walking into a tropical paradise with a pineapple in hand, thinking you've just found the ultimate cure for all your ailments. Ancient civilizations were fascinated by the pineapple's supposed magical properties, and they weren't afraid to try anything, from using it to treat stomach issues to rubbing it on their skin in hopes of getting a glowing complexion. So, What was it about this spiky fruit that had people convinced it was the elixir of life? Let's start with the ancient civilizations that first encountered the pineapple, namely the indigenous peoples of the Americas. The pineapple, native to South America, was prized by the indigenous tribes of the Caribbean and Central America. To them, it wasn't just a fruit, it was a symbol of hospitality, fertility, and life. But long before Western explorers ever tasted the fruit, these ancient peoples had already figured out that pineapple had some pretty impressive qualities, though they didn't necessarily see it as a cure-all. Instead, they used pineapple as a part of their diet, believing it could aid digestion due to its natural enzymes. This wasn't completely unfounded. Pineapple contains an enzyme called bromelain, which helps break down proteins and can aid in digestion. However, the belief that it could cure everything from indigestion to poor skin health was a bit of a stretch. When European explorers first encountered the pineapple during their travels to the New World in the late 15th century, they were mesmerised by its beauty, sweetness, and exotic nature. The fruit quickly became a symbol of wealth and status back in Europe, and with its newfound popularity came the belief that it held some magical health benefits. Think about it. Pineapple was rare, expensive, and not something everyone could get their hands on. Naturally, if you can't have access to it all the time, you start to assign it extraordinary qualities. Ancient people weren't any different. The pineapple became seen as a cure for many of the ailments that plagued people in the pre-modern world. If you had digestive problems, a pineapple could supposedly fix that. Struggling with skin problems? Rub some pineapple on your face. You might end up smelling like a tropical fruit salad, but the idea was that you'd glow with health afterward. Even in the 17th century, Europeans continued to view the pineapple as a kind of miracle fruit. They believed it could improve digestion, clear up skin rashes, and even promote longevity. In fact, it became so beloved that it was often served at fancy dinner parties, not just as a dessert, but as a status symbol. Imagine being invited to a lavish feast, where the centerpiece of the table was a giant, perfectly ripened pineapple. Guests would marvel at its beauty, and if you were lucky enough to get a bite, you might even believe that your health was improving with every chew. If only eating pineapple could solve our problems today. However, as with many ancient remedies, the magical healing powers of the pineapple didn't quite live up to the hype. While pineapple does have health benefits, like providing a good dose of vitamin C and offering some digestive aid through bromelain, its purported ability to cure ailments like poor skin, indigestion, or even more serious health issues like arthritis, was based more on folklore than science. The fruit certainly couldn't transform your complexion or cure your upset stomach in any miraculous way, but it made for a tasty, refreshing snack, and that's where its magic really lay. Despite its grandiose claims, the pineapple's role in ancient medicine was more about providing something sweet and nutritious, rather than a true cure-all. But while it may not have been a medical miracle, the pineapple did play a significant cultural role. Beyond its culinary uses, it became a symbol of hospitality, especially in the American colonies and later in Europe. A pineapple displayed on your doorstep or at your table was a signal of warmth, welcome, and generosity. People believed that offering someone a pineapple was the ultimate way to show respect and goodwill. The fruit's association with wealth and status only enhanced its appeal, and it became a highly sought-after luxury item for the elite. No longer just a tropical fruit, the pineapple had become a symbol of social grace and prosperity. Today, we still revere the pineapple, but for very different reasons. It's no longer touted as a cure for ailments, but instead as a delicious tropical treat that can be enjoyed in fruit salads, cocktails, or as a simple snack. While modern science has debunked most of the ancient beliefs surrounding pineapple, the fruit remains beloved for its sweet, tangy flavour and the refreshing tropical vibe it brings. And of course, we still appreciate it for its health benefits, such as boosting our immune system and aiding digestion. But we no longer expect it to turn us into glowing, healthy creatures overnight. In the end, while the pineapple may not have lived up to its mythic reputation as a cure-all, it still holds a special place in our hearts and our kitchens. From the ancient world to today, the pineapple has remained a symbol of health, wealth, and good taste, just not in the magical, healing way our ancestors once thought. Before essential oils were all the rage, ancient healers were burning herbs to treat everything from headaches to colds. Incense wasn't just for prayer, it was for curing your ailments too. The only problem? It didn't actually cure anything, but it sure did smell nice. If you've ever walked into a room with a wafting scent of lavender, frankincense or sage, you probably thought you were getting a little bit of relaxation with a touch of healing. Well, the ancient world was way ahead of us in this respect, using smoke and incense in much the same way, although their medical understanding was, let's just say, a bit different. Let's start with the ancient Egyptians, who were practically pioneers when it came to using incense and burning herbs for both spiritual and medicinal purposes. The Egyptians burned incense during religious ceremonies, but they also believed in its healing powers. One of the most common incenses burned in ancient Egypt was frankincense, which was extracted from the resin of the boswellia tree. They thought that inhaling the smoke could purify the body and the soul, and it was often used to treat conditions like asthma, coughs, and colds. The warm earthy scent of frankincense was thought to soothe the body's inner workings and calm the mind, which, when you think about it, isn't that far off from how people use aromatherapy today, just without the scientific backing. The Egyptians weren't alone in their aromatic endeavours. Ancient Chinese healers were also burning herbs, though their focus was on balancing the body's internal energies. They believed that the right blend of burning herbs could restore harmony to the body's qi, pronounced chi, which was considered essential for health. The ancient Chinese used herbs like sandalwood, chrysanthemum and ginseng in incense form, believing that the smoke could treat everything from fatigue to anxiety. While we now know that the benefits of these herbs don't directly affect your qi in the way ancient Chinese medicine suggests, the calming effects of the smoke could in fact help someone feel more relaxed. The ancient method of burning herbs was an early form of aromatherapy, albeit without much knowledge of how it actually worked. But if the smell helped people feel better, then it was worth the effort. Over in India, burning herbs was also integral to spiritual practice and health. The ancient practice of Ayurveda, which dates back thousands of years, included the use of aromatic herbs to balance the body's elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Herbs like turmeric, sandalwood, and neem were commonly used in Ayurvedic treatments, and the incense derived from these plants was believed to purify the air, calm the mind, and improve digestion. But just like the Egyptians and Chinese, the real therapeutic effects were more about the psychological impact of the aromas than any proven physical cure. Still, the power of scent to create a peaceful environment has always had value, whether in ancient times or today. In ancient Greece and Rome, herbal incense wasn't just for health, it was also a part of social life. The Romans in particular loved their baths, and no bath was complete without the aromatic scents of burning herbs. The Romans believed that burning myrrh or lavender in their baths helped relax their muscles and promote good digestion. They would also use incense to purify the air in their homes, especially to fight off unpleasant odours, which, let's face it, were a common issue back in the days before indoor plumbing and modern sanitation. In the absence of effective cleaning agents, the Romans relied on the power of herbal smoke to mask the smell of both the air and the body. A little lavender or rosemary burning in the background might not cure your cold, but it sure could make you feel better as you relaxed in the steam. But even when it came to the more medical uses of burning herbs, it was never about curing an illness in the way we think of curing it today. In ancient times, the focus was often on restoring balance, whether that was balancing the humours in your body, restoring harmony to your internal energies, or simply creating a calming atmosphere. The belief was that if the air smelled pleasant and you felt relaxed, the rest of your body would follow suit. While modern medicine might laugh at the idea of using incense to cure your cold, we can't ignore the fact that burning certain herbs, like eucalyptus or peppermint, can have a real, albeit temporary, effect on clearing nasal congestion and helping you breathe easier. The ancient world might not have understood the science behind it, but the act of burning herbs provided comfort, both mentally and physically. In fact, much of what we know about the power of herbs today has its roots in these ancient practices. Modern aromatherapy is based on the same concept, the idea that scents can influence the mind and body. While we now understand the chemistry of essential oils and how they interact with the brain to reduce stress or promote relaxation, ancient cultures relied purely on experience and intuition. And let's be honest, who can argue with the calming effect of the sweet smell of lavender or the sharp, refreshing scent of eucalyptus? So while ancient herbal burning may not have cured much beyond a bad mood or a stuffy nose, it was an early form of self-care one that helped people relax, relieve stress, and create an environment for healing. Even if the herbs didn't do much for your physical ailments, they certainly helped ease your mind, which, as we know today, is half the battle when it comes to feeling better. So the next time you light a candle or diffuse some essential oils, remember, you're participating in a tradition that dates back thousands of years. And even if the healing powers of incense are mostly in the mind, sometimes a good smell is exactly what the doctor ordered. If you had a wound in ancient times, you might have been offered a little something called mouldy bread to help treat it. The mould was full of penicillin, though nobody knew that back then. Spoiler alert, it didn't always work out as planned, but it's one of the earliest forms of antibiotics. Imagine that. You're bleeding, injured, and in pain, and your healer's remedy involves slapping some mouldy bread on the wound and hoping for the best. While we might cringe at the idea today, this was an ancient practice that, albeit a bit unconventional, probably saved more lives than we'd like to admit. Let's rewind a bit and get into the fascinating history behind mouldy bread as a form of treatment. Ancient people didn't have modern medicine, but they were pretty resourceful when it came to treating wounds and infections. Early on, they noticed that certain mouldy substances, particularly mould that grew on bread, seemed to have some sort of healing effect. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to use mouldy bread as a medical treatment. They'd apply the mould directly to cuts and wounds in an attempt to stave off infection, which was especially important given how dangerous even the smallest scrape could be in a time without antibiotics. While they didn't know it, the mould they were using contained penicillin-producing fungi, which, as we know today, can be incredibly effective at fighting bacteria. This mouldy bread treatment wasn't just limited to Egypt. In ancient Greece, Roman soldiers were known to use mouldy bread to treat their battle wounds. In fact, during the wars, soldiers would sometimes apply this magic mould to cuts or injuries caused by swords, spears, and other weapons. The mould, which was often on leftover food or stale bread, was thought to promote healing and reduce infection, though they didn't fully understand why it worked. Ancient healers and soldiers alike noticed that wounds dressed with mouldy bread tended to heal more effectively than those left uncovered. It's remarkable how something as simple as old bread with mould could play a role in one of history's most important medical breakthroughs, even though people had no clue about the microscopic world of bacteria and fungi. But how did mouldy bread actually work, and why was it so helpful? It all boils down to the fact that certain types of mould, particularly the Penicillium fungus, produce compounds capable of killing bacteria. Back then, people didn't know about bacteria or germs, but they could observe patterns. Wounds treated with mouldy bread seemed to heal more quickly, and the pain and infection lessened. Little did they know that this was one of the earliest forms of antibiotics, an idea that wouldn't be understood until centuries later. While the mould itself didn't have the same precision or effectiveness as modern penicillin, it was a natural form of bacteria-fighting medicine, and in a world without hospitals or sanitation, it made a huge difference. The idea of using mould as a treatment wasn't without its risks, of course. Mouldy bread wasn't exactly a controlled solution. You didn't know what kind of mould you were getting, and in some cases the wrong kind of mould could cause more harm than good. While some moulds, like penicillium, could inhibit bacteria growth, others could lead to infection, or even more serious complications. Still, people who used mouldy bread often saw better outcomes than those who had no treatment at all, so they kept using it. This reliance on trial and error, paired with observation, laid the groundwork for future medical discoveries. It wasn't until the 1920s that modern medicine fully realised the potential of penicillin, thanks to Alexander Fleming's famous discovery of the penicillium mould and its powerful antibiotic properties. Fleming's research revolutionised medicine, leading to the mass production of penicillin, which has saved millions of lives over the years. The mouldy bread of the ancient world was, in a sense, a crude precursor to the antibiotic treatments we have today. While it didn't have the same effectiveness or precision, it marked an important step in humanity's journey to understanding and fighting infections. The use of mouldy bread in ancient medicine is a reminder of how early human beings worked with what they had, finding innovative, if somewhat unconventional, solutions to problems they didn't fully understand. In a world where death from infection was common, this mouldy medicine was one of the few options available. While we laugh at the idea now, it's fascinating to consider that something as simple as mould could play such a vital role in the development of antibiotics. So next time you bite into a slice of fresh bread, you might want to think twice before tossing out that stale loaf that's starting to get a little bit of mould. Maybe, just maybe, it could have a bit more medicinal power than you realise. Of course, please don't actually try to treat your wounds with it, but it's an interesting reminder of how resourceful ancient people were in their attempts to cure the ailments that plagued them. Ancient spas weren't the relaxing retreats we think of today. Instead, they often involve sweat lodges, mud baths and hot stone massages to balance your humours. While it may sound like a trip to a relaxing retreat, the reality was less zen and more grin and bear it. People in ancient civilizations were all about achieving balance. Balance of the body, balance of the mind and balance of their humours, but the treatments they used to reach that state were far from what we would call comfortable today. So, if you ever dreamed of a soothing spa day in the ancient world, be ready for a lot more sweat and discomfort than relaxation. Let's start with the ancient Romans, who loved their baths. The Roman bathhouse, or thermae, was a social and cultural hub, and for many Romans it wasn't just about cleaning up, it was about healing. But healing in the Roman bath wasn't about massages or cucumber facials. Instead, it was about extreme temperatures and vigorous scrubbing. The Romans used a combination of hot, cold and tepid water to balance the body's humours. They'd start in the warm room, move to the hot room, and then finish with a plunge into cold water. Each temperature change was designed to stimulate the body and promote good health. The goal was to purify the body, but at what cost? You'd be drenched in sweat, and the whole process often left people feeling more exhausted than invigorated. The strigil, a curved metal tool used for scraping sweat and dirt from the skin, was an essential part of Roman bathhouse culture. After hours in the hot rooms, the bathers would lay down on a marble slab, and a bath attendant would scrape their skin with the strigil. While this might sound like a soothing exfoliation, it was more like an intense, almost painful scrub down. People would leave the bathhouses feeling cleansed, but probably not relaxed. These treatments weren't about pampering, they were about promoting health through discomfort. The idea was that by releasing toxins from the body through sweating and scraping, you were achieving balance and well-being. It was a little like a mini workout minus the gym membership. But the Romans weren't the only ones embracing this spa-like treatment. In ancient Greece, people also visited bathhouses, and their spa treatments were no less grueling. Greek physicians prescribed steam baths, hot massages, and cold water plunges as cures for everything from sore muscles to digestive problems. One of the most common treatments was the use of mud. Bathers would cover their bodies in thick layers of mud, allowing it to dry on their skin before washing it off. The belief was that mud could help heal skin ailments and draw out toxins. But let's be clear, the mud wasn't the nice, soothing kind we associate with facials today. It was thick, gritty, and often smelled awful. If you were lucky, you might get a soothing massage afterward, but it was just as likely that the spa was more about endurance than enjoyment. Meanwhile, over in ancient Egypt, things got a little more mystical. Egyptians were famous for their beauty routines, but they didn't achieve glowing skin or shiny hair by simply relaxing in a bath. The Egyptians used oils and scented baths in a ritualistic manner, but many of their treatments involved more aggressive methods, such as sweat lodges and harsh scrubbing. To achieve perfect skin, Egyptian women would soak in warm baths infused with oils like almond oil, frankincense, and myrrh. Luxurious, yes, but they would follow this with vigorous scrubbing, sometimes using abrasives like sand or pumice. If you had acne or skin blemishes, you might also be treated to a ritualistic massage, which didn't exactly focus on relaxation, but more on improving blood flow and toning the skin. And of course, they didn't have the concept of relaxing massage. It was more about working the body to promote health and beauty. In Asia, ancient Chinese healing practices incorporated what we now recognise as a form of acupressure. These practices often involved hot stones, herbs, and intense massage to promote balance and energy flow within the body. A favourite technique was the use of heated stones placed on certain pressure points on the body to relax muscles and relieve pain. But again, the treatment wasn't about soothing relaxation. The pressure applied to the body during these treatments was intense, designed to realign the body's energies and clear blockages, not to make you feel drowsy and pampered. The stones, heated to high temperatures, were placed on the back, and the body's acupuncture points to relieve tension, but it often left the person sore afterward rather than rejuvenated. The It's also worth mentioning the ancient Egyptians and their use of herbal infusions and oils to treat everything from skin conditions to digestive problems. Though their remedies could be soothing, they weren't without discomfort. An example is the use of peppermint oil to relieve headaches or rosewater for skin irritation. These oils were used in combination with massages that, while beneficial, were not the soft calming strokes we experience today. In ancient cultures, these spa treatments were far more about restoring balance than about indulgence. So, while modern spas offer luxurious treatments designed to relax and pamper, ancient spa treatments were often a test of endurance, designed more to restore balance to the body than to soothe the soul. The comfort was secondary, and the real focus was on health, purification, and aligning the body's energies. In fact, you might leave an ancient spa feeling completely drained. But hey, at least you'd have clean skin and a balanced humoral system. Next time you step into a spa for a luxurious massage, just be thankful you don't have to endure a sweaty, uncomfortable sweat lodge or cover yourself in mud to feel better. Ancient treatments may have been brutal, but they were born from a deep desire to find healing in the most unconventional ways possible. What do you do if you've got a nasty bite or wound in ancient times? Well, just find a snake and use its venom, of course. Snake venom was used as a medicine for all sorts of things, even though it was just as likely to kill you as it was to cure you. In the ancient world, the line between healing and harm was often blurry, and snake venom was no exception. Despite its lethal reputation, venom was believed to have magical properties, and was used in remedies for everything from pain relief to anti-aging. Whether it was ingested, applied topically, or even used in rituals, the idea that snake venom could heal was rooted in a strange mixture of superstition, trial and error, and a little bit of desperation. Let's start with the ancient Egyptians, who were among the first to harness the power of snake venom. The Egyptians believed that snake venom had the ability to cure diseases, and they used it in various forms for medicinal purposes. Pharaohs, in particular, would often use snake venom as part of their royal treatments. They would mix the venom with other herbs, oils or animal fats, creating a paste that could be applied to wounds or injuries. This combination, they believed, would promote healing. What they didn't realise was that while some venom contains enzymes that can help reduce inflammation, it could also easily cause severe poisoning if not used correctly. The Egyptians also thought venom had spiritual power. For example, cobra venom was considered particularly potent, as the cobra was a symbol of divine power and protection. Some ancient Egyptian healers believed that applying cobra venom to the skin would not only heal wounds, but also bring the patient closer to the gods. It was a risky business. After all, the venom of a cobra can stop the heart in minutes. But in a world without antibiotics or modern medicines, the ancient Egyptians were willing to take any chance they could to ward off death. Moving westward to ancient Greece, the use of snake venom became even more widespread. The Greeks, under the influence of Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, incorporated venom into their medical practices. Hippocrates himself recommended the use of snake venom for a variety of ailments, including treating infections and even certain forms of cancer. Ancient Greek doctors would mix snake venom with other herbs or food and have their patients ingest it, hoping that it would cure their sickness. The venom was believed to have powerful properties that could purify the body and rid it of toxins. Of course, much of this was based on guesswork. Ancient Greeks had no understanding of toxins or enzymes, let alone the complexity of venom. But Greek mythology is also rife with examples of the mysterious power of snake venom. The famous Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine and healing, was often depicted with a staff wrapped by a serpent, a symbol that still represents medicine today. The Greeks viewed snakes as healers and protectors, and snake venom was thought to carry the same healing potential as the snakes themselves. However, the line between myth and medicine blurred quickly. While snake venom may have had some therapeutic use, it was just as likely to lead to death as it was to lead to healing. Even in ancient Greece, people were regularly exposed to the deadly effects of venom, but it was hard to ignore the supposed healing powers they attributed to it. As we reflect on the strange, often uncomfortable remedies and practices of the past, it's impossible not to marvel at the resilience of those who lived through them. Imagine a day where the cure for your fever might involve something as bizarre as sleeping with a lizard under your pillow, or drinking wine spiced with strange herbs in hopes of soothing your pain. It was a time when survival often meant enduring discomfort, from the sting of medicinal potions to the smells of ancient baths, all in the name of health and healing. Yet, through it all, people persevered. Despite the strange and sometimes hazardous methods they used, they pressed on, hopeful that the next remedy might bring relief. They faced hardships with strength and creativity, inventing solutions from whatever they had available, whether it was a handful of herbs, the power of prayer, or the belief in the healing magic of a frog. Today, we are blessed with modern medicine, comfort, and the luxury of knowing that there are safer, more effective ways to care for ourselves. We have access to clean water, electricity, and the ease of modern healthcare, things that many of our ancestors could only dream of. So as you settle into your bed tonight, let your mind drift to a place of gratitude for the small comforts we often take for granted. The struggles of the past may have been tough, but they also remind us of how far we've come. And as the world quiets around you, let this peaceful moment wash over you, knowing that, like those before us, we too have the strength to face whatever comes our way. Rest well, and let the calm of this reflection guide you gently to sleep.